At 6:17 a.m., just 15 miles from the pristine beaches of Oahu, Hawaii, the Pacific looked calm and untouched. But beneath that peaceful surface, a silent contest was already underway. A Russian surveillance vessel was moving closer to U.S. territorial waters, attempting to gather highly sensitive electronic data linked to the Pacific Fleet at Pearl Harbor. Its captain likely believed the ship could remain unnoticed, slipping through like a shadow. But that assumption did not last long. Inside a classified operations center nearby, the U.S. Coast Guard had already identified the vessel and understood exactly what it was doing. There was no dramatic overreaction, no chaos, no rushed show of force. Instead, the response was controlled, deliberate, and highly professional. It became a powerful reminder of why probing America's strategic backyard is never taken lightly. At the center of this quiet confrontation was the Russian AGI ship Karelia, a classic example of Soviet-era endurance enhanced by modern signal processing upgrades. Part of the Project 864 Vishnya class introduced in the 1980s, the ship is essentially a floating intelligence collection platform built to listen, observe, and record. At around 3,500 tons fully loaded, its appearance is unmistakable. Large dome-shaped radomes and dense antenna arrays cover the superstructure, all designed to capture the faintest electronic emissions across the spectrum. Its mission falls under Signals Intelligence, or SIGINT, which includes two key areas. Communications Intelligence, known as COMINT, focused on intercepting voice and data transmissions, and Electronic Intelligence, or ELINT, which targets emissions from radars, sonars, and weapons-related systems. What makes a ship like Karelia so concerning is that it does not need to launch anything or take overt action. It simply listens, by passively recording the electronic signature of a U.S. Aegis Destroyer's SPY-1 radar, its side lobes, pulse repetition patterns, and unique technical fingerprint, it can help build a detailed reference library for future military planning. Its close position near Oahu also gives it the opportunity to monitor a wide range of activity, from command-level Link 16 and satellite traffic to unsecured mobile phone data used by American personnel on shore. Its presence only 15 miles from the U.S. economic zone was no accident. It was a calculated move designed to collect strategic information that would otherwise take years and enormous resources to obtain. The hull may resemble an aging cargo vessel, but inside, the ship likely carries upgraded digital receivers and advanced data linking systems supplied by Moscow. In practice, that makes it a quiet but persistent hunter, an electronic observer trying to operate near the defensive edge of America's Pacific stronghold. The psychological effect matters too. A ship like this is not only gathering data, it is sending a message. Its presence is meant to project reach, test reactions, and remind Washington that even distant strategic areas are still being watched. To answer this kind of sophisticated but non-kinetic intrusion, the U.S. response became a textbook example of joint force coordination and technical precision. This was not about explosive force. It was about control of the environment, electronic, physical, and informational. The first asset deployed was a U.S. Coast Guard HC-13OJ Super Hercules, a long-range maritime patrol aircraft often mistaken for its Air Force counterpart, but specially configured for surveillance, coordination, and command support. Flying at roughly 15,000 feet, the HC-130J quickly became the primary intelligence node. Its sensors began mapping Karelia's electromagnetic profile in real time. Using onboard radar and specialized antenna arrays integrated into the fuselage, the aircraft focused on measuring the power output, directional behavior, and frequency hopping patterns of the Russian ship's ELINT systems. This was the opening move in an electronic chess match. By forcing the vessel to operate in ways that exposed its own technical behavior, the U.S. effectively turned the spy ship's sensors into sources of intelligence for American analysts. But the centerpiece of the physical response was the USCGC Stone, WMSL-757, a 418-foot Legend-class national security cutter and one of the most advanced ships in the Coast Guard fleet. Built as a multi-mission platform capable of speeds above 28 knots, Stone is equipped with a 57mm Mark 110 naval gun and the AN/SLQ-32V electronic warfare system. In this case, however, its role was not conventional force projection. Its real value was as a mobile counter-surveillance platform. From its command center, the crew activated passive electronic support measures, listening carefully to Karelia's emissions while also deploying carefully calculated bursts of electronic interference. This was not random noise. It was controlled, modulated disruption designed to complicate, contaminate, and overwhelm the Russian ship's collection efforts. The result was a coordinated protective envelope around Oahu's strategic coastline. The aircraft identified and characterized the threat, while the cutter disrupted the collection process. Any data Karelia managed to gather would be heavily degraded, at best incomplete, and at worst shaped by precisely managed American countermeasures. This layered response demonstrated how seamlessly U.S. maritime doctrine can work in practice. The Coast Guard, often seen mainly as a law enforcement service, was operating here with the technical precision and strategic discipline of a frontline defense asset. The peak of this quiet, high-stakes encounter came not with loud confrontation, but with calm execution. At 7:05 a.m., the USCGC Stone reached its intended position, a precise 1,000-yard offset from Karelia's starboard quarter, matching the Russian vessel's speed of 10 knots and its course of 270 degrees. This was more than an escort, it was a controlled containment posture. The Russian ship, designed to take advantage of the Pacific's openness, was now boxed in by both physical observation and electronic monitoring. Inside the cutter's Combat Information Center, the crew remained calm and methodical, closely tracking the ship's response. Soon they saw a change. Russian operators, realizing the American cutter was not simply present as a warning, but was actively shaping the electromagnetic environment, began cycling through available frequency bands in search of a cleaner channel for their passive arrays. The U.S. systems picked up the shift immediately. That change confirmed the countermeasure effort was working. The interference was strong enough to degrade the Russian sensors, turning the signals they hoped to collect into a dense, unusable stream of distorted data. In simple terms, Karelia was trying to extract clarity from a wall of controlled noise. At 7:22 a.m., the Coast Guard HC-130J, operating under the call sign Archangel 47, made a low pass at 500 feet, crossing directly in front of Karelia's bow. This was not a stunt, and it was not simple intimidation. It was the final stage of sensor validation. As the aircraft passed overhead, its synthetic aperture radar and high-resolution optical systems captured definitive imagery of the ship's antennas, domes, and deck activity. That gave U.S. analysts visual confirmation of the vessel's intelligence collection configuration in that exact moment. In the end, this encounter showed something important. Modern strategic competition is not always dramatic or loud. Sometimes it unfolds in silence, through signals, sensors, positioning, and precision. And on that morning off Oahu, the United States made it clear that even the quietest challenge would be detected, understood, and answered with discipline. At the same time, the U.S. Navy, working from an intelligence fusion cell at Pearl Harbor, launched a coordinated quiet period protocol across selected high-value communication networks in the Oahu area. In simple terms, that move denied Karelia access to any truly valuable live electronic traffic, leaving it with little of real importance to collect. The combined result was highly effective. The Russian captain, who had tried to take an unnoticed sip from America's electronic well, now found his collection systems flooded with unusable interference, while every movement of his vessel was being carefully tracked and recorded. At that point, his only real option was to hold course and speed, fully aware that the mission had been thoroughly compromised and documented. The situation continued to intensify, not through reckless maneuvering or visible confrontation, but through the steady, disciplined use of superior technology and tightly coordinated operations. In the end, the opposing side was effectively neutralized without a single dramatic escalation. After that, Karelia shifted from being an active intelligence-gathering platform to little more than a closely watched shadow. The Russian captain, having tried and failed to test America's electronic defenses, had no practical choice but to continue his transit, knowing that any unusual movement or renewed collection attempt would trigger an immediate and decisive response. For the next 72 hours, the USCGC, together with rotating Coast Guard and Navy patrol aircraft, maintained a relentless escort pattern, at times staying within 500 yards of the Russian AGI vessel. From Moscow's perspective, the cost-to-benefit balance of the operation was deeply unfavorable. Karelia, a platform that cost hundreds of millions to operate and sustain, had been rendered functionally ineffective by a U.S. Coast Guard cutter, a ship more commonly associated with search and rescue missions or counter-narcotics patrols. Any electronic data the Russian vessel managed to collect was likely distorted by American countermeasures, meaning analysts would now have to spend months sorting through information of questionable value, investing more time, labor, and money just to separate useful material from contamination. What the United States protected, meanwhile, was beyond price: the integrity of U.S. Navy fleet communications, the operational behavior of sensitive radar systems, and the electronic security of one of the Pacific's most important strategic command centers. But perhaps the most lasting impact was psychological. For the crew aboard Karelia, watching the calm, technically confident, and unmistakably superior American response must have made the gap impossible to ignore. They were not stopped by force in the traditional sense. They were outmatched by a flawlessly executed non-kinetic chain of action that turned an expensive intelligence mission into an embarrassing extended escort. And there was something especially symbolic about the image itself. A Coast Guard cutter, an unmistakable emblem of American sovereignty and maritime authority, maintaining a precise, disciplined shadow over the Russian vessel. After all the electronic tension, that steady presence projected confidence, control, and complete professionalism on the American side. The price of the Russian move was clear: a compromised intelligence effort and the exposure of its own electronic limitations, a far greater cost than any minor gain from shaving distance off its route. This quiet encounter off the coast of Oahu delivers a simple but powerful strategic lesson. The era of low-risk passive electronic surveillance near the American homeland is no longer what it once was. This operation demonstrated how the U.S. concept of integrated defense can extend beyond traditional weapons and into the non-kinetic domain. It also proved that the U.S. Coast Guard is far more than a service of cutters and rescue crews. It is a fully integrated part of the homeland defense structure, capable of applying the tactical discipline and technical sophistication needed to confront a serious strategic challenge. Karelia attempted to probe America's electronic sovereignty by operating in the gray space of international law. The answer was not dramatic escalation, but a firm, professional, and overwhelmingly effective shutdown of the mission. This was not an act of aggression. It was deterrence in its most disciplined form, defined by precision, coordination, and technological superiority. And the message could not be clearer. The United States has the technical capability, the operational doctrine, and the unified command structure, from Indo-Pacific intelligence centers all the way to the bridge of a Coast Guard cutter, to disrupt and neutralize any threat aimed at compromising its strategic security. Whether that threat comes in the form of a hypersonic weapon moving at extreme speed or a surveillance ship listening quietly at 10 knots, the principle is the same. Coordinated strength, disciplined execution, and total situational awareness remain the foundation of American security at sea. The oceans remain open to lawful transit, but the waters surrounding America's key strategic centers are no longer permissive spaces for hostile electronic collection. This event should be understood as a clear signal to Moscow and to any other potential challenger. Every maneuver, every transmission, every electronic trace near U.S. shores is not only observed, but can also be actively countered by a force operating at an exceptionally high level of technical and professional competence. Now, we turn it over to the audience. What technological breakthrough do you think will be most important in preventing these kinds of geopolitical standoffs in the future? Defending the U.S. island chain demands constant awareness, rapid adaptation, and technology that continues to evolve faster than the threats it faces.